I want to thank Igel for being a part of this panel. I want to thank Mr. Duncan. I've heard a lot about you, and I'm so glad that you're joining us. I want to extend my thanks to Kelly. Kelly, I had phenomenal discussion with her, and kind of thinking, if we have people like this and work together, just imagine how the world will be. C. Janelle, my old friend, welcome for coming. Dr. Walker, Andre Brown, I salute each and every one of you. Dory, who by misspelled her name, and she was very kind to tell me in a very gentle way, and I learned how to spell her name. So, and of course, my co-workers whom if you were not them, it wouldn't be possible. Mr. Adam, thank you very much. Miss Page, same goes to you. And Audrey, welcome. And anyone I didn't call, please don't take offense. You are equally welcome to this occasion, as we are working together in a unified way to look at the immensity of the problems we have in this world, and hopefully objectively find ways to deal with them in a way that makes our condition better. Condition of everyone, condition of every country, condition of everybody on earth, regardless of where they may be coming from, because we are all human beings and we deserve to be treated accordingly. So thank you very much. So what I will do now is that we're gonna begin. One of the panelists is having issue with connectivity, and I've tried to reach him, but I haven't been able to do that. I hope that Adam had sent him the link. I think that will work. To be candid with you, I don't really know what's the problem with the link. I got so many emails from different places saying that they did not, that they're trying to get in, but they cannot get in. I tried to send them another one, but I'm not sure how it's going to be working. So with all that said, I wanna begin by going to the girl who is our guest there. What I can tell you about Yegal. Yegal, am I pronouncing your name correctly or wrongly?
Correctly.
I'm so happy because most people crucify my name. I can even say that 95% of people who try to call me crucify, then they call me Dr. Joseph. I'm like, that's not the formal way we do it. You call me Joseph or you call me Dr. Moye. One or the other, I can't call you both. So it's a pleasure to have you. So I met your girl through a friend, somebody who works with us too. And he had spoken extensively about him. And we've been trying to get in touch. But finally, when we got in touch, I'm so pleased that we have somebody of that caliber. Because oftentimes you go like sheep. Whoever supports us, we follow the person, even when the person is 100% wrong. And who may not support us may be 100% right. Somehow we don't have the courage to say what the truth is. I see a girl as someone who tries to do what is right, tries to bring people together, uniting them in an effort to create a better situation where all issues can be addressed in a way that is suited for everyone. So without saying too much, what I would say to you girl is, you girl, could you, well, before I say that, for those of you who don't know, SDIG stems from the view that we human beings tend to want something that is good for ourselves. And it takes a different humankind to be able to see him or herself, but as well as see others, and tend to put the person's shoes in the shoes of others. And could you imagine a world where it's done that way? So SDIG stems from the fact that we realize that when you get people together, people who may disagree vehemently on whatever the issue is. If you get them together and they're able to talk to one another, begin to understand where the person may be coming from, see the window through which the opponent sees the things, as well as see it the way you see it. We don't tell people to compromise principles, but we encourage people to find middle ground. Because it's only when you find middle grounds through sharing stories, which I'm sure that your girl will share with you, coming to the bad Ethiopian Jewish people, what had happened for so many, I mean, it's like for so many years, 2,000 years, and so many other things, but I don't want to get into that. Your girl will tell us more about it.
Joseph, you've muted yourself.
Thanks for telling me, Kelly. So through looking at various windows, you not only see through your window, you see through the windows other people see the world. And by combining the experiences, we can shape a better world. So without going further, that's what SDIG does, bring people together, put them in a situation where they could share their views, whether they agree or disagree, but ultimately come with solution to the problem. That's leadership. So without no more talking again, I asked Jigel to tell us, first of all, tell us who you are, what committed you to doing this, and where you plan to go with it. I'm gonna come back with more questions.
Thank you, Joseph. And first I want to say I deeply appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and the audience on this platform. And I'm honored that you thought enough of me and the discussions that we've had to think that they should be broadcast more widely on your platform. So I have to thank you and sadly, tremendously for the work that you've done putting this together. Okay, so who am I? My name is Yigal Kahana. I'm a father of 3 boys, 2 twins aged 11 and another one who's 9. We're of the Orthodox Jewish persuasion. I was born in Hackensack, New Jersey. I lived in Guadalajara, Mexico, and St. Louis, Missouri, and Cleveland, Ohio, before we moved to Miami in 1979. And I've been here since then. Now I work as an attorney most of the time, as far as my day job is concerned, in Miami and in Broward County. I sue insurance companies, mainly on behalf of medical providers, but I'm also an attorney in a wider sense that I'm interested in broader social issues of the dynamic between the law and how society operates. My siblings, 3 of them moved to Israel in the early to mid 90s. And I started traveling to Israel frequently to visit them. And at the time, in 1993, when I went to visit one of my brothers, it was one of the waves of immigration where the Israeli government brought tens of thousands of Ethiopian Jews from Ethiopia or from Sudan to Israel. And it was a kind of a phenomenon at the time that, you know, in such a small country, so many people coming at once made headlines, made waves, and then also issues arose in terms of how the whole process was handled, because when people do some things of that magnitude, they haven't always thought them all through before they do it. They just do it, and then they try to, you know, do as best they can and clean up any messes later that might have happened in the process. So I got to watch that unfolding. And around 1999, end of 1999, I met an amazing character named Solomon Akale, who is one of my best friends to this day, and I consider him a mentor. And he, through his organization, which was called Bahalachin, which means our culture in Amharic, introduced me to a lot of the, let's say, movers and shakers of the Ethiopian Jewish community, but also of the Israeli community, the Israeli society at large, and brought me to the Knesset to hear discussions, and brought me to community centers, and introduced me to, again, a lot of people who were involved in the decision-making process of how the absorption of Ethiopian Jewry into Israeli society was handled and took place. In 2001, he took me to a meeting in the Knesset, and I heard one of the ministers who had called the meeting asked the Ministry of Education representative, what's the strategy of the Ministry of Education for integrating Ethiopian students into Israeli society? And the answer, surprisingly to me, was, we have no strategy. And when I heard that, I thought, so even I could do better than nothing. You have no strategy, that's a problem. And so it took a while. I put together a curriculum, and after much inquiry and investigation, I began a program in 2004 that started operating in 2005 in the cities of Kiryat Malachi and Lud and Cholon for teaching Ethiopian Israeli students English, because it came to me that one of the keys to integrating Ethiopian students or anybody into Israeli society, into modern society, is English language. And whoever has a good command of the English language, it gets doors open to them that they wouldn't have if they didn't have a good command of the English language. And there's reasons as far as matriculation exams and what they need in order to get into college, and it's more difficult if you don't have a high enough level of English. So this program went on for 3 years in those cities. And again, I got to meet amazing and tremendous people. One of whom turned out to be the older sister of the woman that I married, and who's now the mother of my children. And there are a lot of organizations in Israel who also got involved in teaching English, or saying that they're teaching English to high school students. And because of a conflict, I ended up moving the same class from Kiryat Malachi to Jizra Zarka, an Arab town, a little further up, 50 miles up the coast. And I operated the class there for 7 years. And the grades that the students got, Jizra Zarka is basically the poorest town in Israel with the lowest high school graduation rates and the highest high school dropout rates in the country. For those 7 years that we operated the program, were the 7 years of the best high school matriculation rates and the lowest dropout rate. There's only one high school. And I became close friends with the principal, who's since moved on, and now he's an attorney and was the vice mayor of the town for a while. And I'm still in touch with the students, some of whom have gone on to become English teachers, some of whom have gone on to become doctors, or lawyers, and business people, and including girls. Most of the, in that time, usually girls didn't go on to college, but through this program, we managed to propel about half of the girls who were in our program into college and then into careers which was almost unheard of in a town before then. After 2015, when the principal moved on to a different job, to working at the municipality, and my English teacher, who had been working with us for 7 years, got promoted to regional director and couldn't teach in one school anymore. It was very difficult to find another English teacher, and I ceased with the program. But through a contact of mine who's also an Ethiopian Israeli, very high up in the police department, I started to get involved in government operation that was happening, where because of protests that were happening in the street every few years, when there was some sort of an incident involving the police and an Ethiopian Israeli person, whether it was the incident where police were videoed beating up an Israeli Ethiopian soldier for no reason, and that led to protests, or the killing of a Ethiopian child who was walking around with a knife in the middle of the night but hadn't posed a threat to anybody. These led to protests, and some of them are pretty raucous protests where they closed down the streets and the highways in various areas, and not unlike the protests that occurred here in the States. So the government undertook an operation to try to solve this, and brought together the Justice Ministry and the Ministry of the Interior and the police department and representatives of many different Ethiopian nonprofits in Israel, which there are many. The one that's in charge, Tebeka, that's in charge of legal representation of Ethiopians, Fidel, that's in charge of giving scholarships to students who want to go on to higher education, the Jewish Agency, the various federations, and Merchavim, Yamin Or, different organizations, which is the biggest like boarding school in the country for Ethiopian students in Haifa. And about 70 Ethiopian representatives met with the different ministers and officers of the government, and spent about 2 years on a thing called the Part1 Commission, where they came up with suggestions, recommendations for what to do. And I'd gone to a lot of those meetings and met most of those people, and got to have in-depth discussions with the head of the Justice Ministry and the Prime Minister's deputy about how they were going to handle this, so that this had happened before. The government had made decisions before, and they hadn't seemed to be effective. And so, how are we going to change the dynamic? And so Prime Minister Netanyahu in 2017 declared a national struggle to eliminate racism, which I thought was a great step forward to formalize the process. And as part of that struggle, the Part1 Commission issued a number of recommendations. And those recommendations included things like increasing the number of Ethiopian Israeli policemen, increasing the number of Ethiopian Israeli English teachers, increasing the penalties on people who were found guilty of incidents of race-based discrimination, and many more detailed tactical suggestions. Since 2017, actually since 2019, I begun working with the Israeli Police Department specifically on a couple of programs. One included I bought coolers and gave them to the policemen, and they put the coolers in their trunks of their cars so they could drive around and fill them up with snacks. So when they see children in the street, you stop for a few minutes and share a snack with the kids in a park and a playground bench, and just kind of get to know them for a few minutes, and then before moving on to the next place. I also started doing Zoom classes with different groups of Israeli policemen, like 10 at a time or 15 at a time, on the idea of unteaching racism. And theoretically, I mean strategically more than tactically, how do we approach this problem before we think about which tactics we're going to use to improve the situation on the ground? Theoretically, what's the overall umbrella strategy that we can use in order to decide which tactics are the best tactics to implement? So I mean, now that I have 3 children who are half Ethiopian, half me, this is what drives me, not just a recognition that living in a healthy society automatically makes your life better. And so that's the 40,000 foot view. Whatever improves society, whatever makes a society better. There's a difference between personal progress and social progress. And anybody could think that what's good for them is progress for them. But whatever is good for the whole society is by definition good for you, because it makes the society in which you live better. And so I have this kind of theoretical drive to make this happen, to unite people and to progress civilization beyond racism, and then also a personal interest in seeing my boys grow up and then their children in a world where people don't think in terms of race and don't have their brains pickled by racial ideas, but can look, as Joseph said, objectively at things. And I believe when Joseph was talking about common ground that people can find, the best place to find common ground is in objective reality, because those are the things that equally apply to everyone. So progress has to come out of objectivity, and efforts to eliminate racism have to be grounded in objectivity. And this is why I was so attracted to what Joseph and SDIG are doing, because I see that they're tending toward that same equilibrium of expanding objectivity leading to progress. So that's my introduction. I hope I didn't take too long. If you said 5 minutes, I was at 15. Sorry, Joseph.
I thought that you gave us a lot to chew. In fact, for me, it was after discussion with you that I did some research and uncovered things I never knew before about the Bet Israelis, to call it appropriately, and that they had been on the mountain of Ethiopia for over 2,000 years. And then in about 1980 to 1990, and some other occasions, there were airlift of bringing them to Israel, just as those who were in Eastern Europe were brought back to Europe. However, the racism somehow creeps into how certain people are dealt with. And that's what we have in common here, because regardless of how people say it or position people take, racism is a reality. It's more so to those who bear the brunt of it, and they feel really not trusting. So look at what is happening with simple vaccines. People would reference history, and some people say, no, 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 on one hand, and at the same time, they say there will be no teaching of critical race theory. And I keep wondering, do they know what it means? And I think it will take discussions such as what you've done, bringing people together, to begin to discuss, how do we teach this? How do we do this? And with engagement, you are absolutely right. Found common ground, provided it's grounded on objectivity. Because when you're objective, it's hard for people who are manufacturing, their own facts to win. They can win maybe on temporary time through tactical means, as you were indicating. But when it comes strategic approach, they're not gonna get anywhere, because the truth will always prevail. However, people want to sweep them under the rug. So thank you so much. And now let's go to Carlton Myers. Carlton Myers is a lawyer too. It seems like we're dealing with just lawyers today. And he is doing incredible job, just as you indicated. He's getting lawmakers, some of whom sometimes I think, do these people really know what they should know in order to lead? And I'll leave that question there. But I think I found Myers over the course of meeting him and chatting with him and getting to know him, that he's doing tremendous things with states, using his legal tools to help them craft bills that will enable people to, to get them be responsible for their actions. So without saying more, Mr. Myers, would you introduce yourself to this audience? Tell them what you do, what drives you to doing those things, and how you are seeing the future in terms of what you are doing. Is Mr. Myers there? All right. Well, I'm gonna call once more. If he doesn't respond, then we're gonna shift to gear. Mr. Myers? Mr. Myers?
Hello, do you hear me?
Yeah, we've been waiting. We've been waiting to hear you, my friend. How are you?
Okay, yeah, I've been talking. I guess my my system is not lined up. Let me line it up real quick. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah, it's lined up now.
Are you able to speak now?
Yeah, my camera's not working, so I'll only be able to talk. As long as y'all can hear me, we should be good.
Well, your voice is good, even though I always prefer faces, to look at the faces to see what they're saying, to make sure that he's squaring with the face and the talk. But I know you, so I believe that your talk will be as good as your face. So with that, let's go with the voice. The question I was posing is for you to tell us who you are and what do you do, and what propels you to continue to do what you do, and where do you expect it to go going forward?
That's a whole lot. Oh man. Well, so yeah, Carlton T. Mayers II, Esquire. I'm the owner, founder, and head consultant of Mayer Strategic Solutions LLC. And what we do is we work with communities across the country and other parts of the world as well on advancing, reimagining public safety through community empowerment centered approach. That is all done through something I call the CAT method, which stands for C for community empowerment, A for accountability, and T for transparency. So essentially, there's 3 components to the CAT method. Each component must be achieved in order for the CAT method to be successful. So right now, each one of those components I apply to policing reform. As all of you know, ever since last year's national, in my opinion, global-wide protests calling for substantive policing reform and for Black Lives Matter. As a result of that, what I've done is I've formed a model that can be applied to any community and that they themselves can be empowered to be able to tailor that model so that way it works for their community, for their initiative. And I know that Yigal and I, we had a good conversation about how this could apply to even the work he's doing, and so this is a great model. I'm going to break it down for y'all a little bit, and then I'm going to open it up because Yigal spoke for longer than 7 minutes. So I'm going to try to speak for less than that amount of time to balance it out. So essentially the way it works is that C stands for community empowerment. This entails community members being involved in, having knowledge of, and having at least 50% voting power. I'm gonna repeat that, at least 50% voting power over all police activities that are directly related to police-civilian interactions like stops, uses of force, sexual misconduct, etc. Now, these community members, they need to have this, it has to be the community members, especially coming out of zip codes and neighborhoods in the community where there's high levels of negative police interactions. And so These community members essentially have their fingers on the pulse on if community police relations are really improving or not. So it's very important that they are the ones who have at least 50% voting power, and that they are the ones to direct where the improvement is going to go, because they are the ones who are constantly dealing with these negative police interactions, because they live in these communities. They know people that live in these communities. So they are always dealing with these issues. If it be they themselves dealing with it, or they hearing about or seeing somebody else dealing with these negative police interactions. So they're going to be the ones essentially who are going to know if things are truly getting better or not. It's not going to be community members who don't live in those zip codes and neighborhoods, right? We see that a lot of times anytime we get community members to be a part of some kind of a advisory board or another kind of civilian oversight committee, they tend to choose community members who don't live in those directly impacted communities. So they're not giving an accurate assessment on the situation. We want to make sure that we are having long-standing change. In order to do that, you have to have those who are most directly impacted at the forefront steering the ship. You cannot have those who are not. And so next is accountability. Accountability involves creating an inhospitable environment for law enforcement officers who engage in misconduct by establishing both internal and external accountability mechanisms. So when I say an internal accountability mechanism, as it relates to law enforcement, that means it would be within the law enforcement agency. For instance, an early intervention system that allows supervisors of rank and file officers to monitor the conduct of those rank and file officers to determine, if they are actually adhering to their departmental trainings and policies. And if they're not, to then hold them accountable either by intervening through counseling or remedial training, or by advancing disciplinary action that could result in the suspension or termination of the officer. Now, when I say an external accountability mechanism, I mean one that's outside of a police department. For instance, a civilian oversight authority, like I mentioned earlier. Now, an example of that could be a civilian complaint review board that has both subpoena powers and disciplinary powers. And so this would be a board that will be staffed only by civilians and would be staffed with civilians who were coming out of those directly impacted communities and would have at least 50% of that voting power. Don't forget I said that earlier, right? And they would be tasked with receiving complaints from other civilians about law enforcement misconduct. And then they would have the power to subpoena anyone or any materials that are related to the complaint for their investigation. And as a result of their investigation, if they find that the officer did engage in misconduct, then they can have the power to advance disciplinary action that could result in suspension or termination of the officer. Now, the last component is transparency. Now, typically, transparency is defined as law enforcement agencies essentially being above board, right, with their community members about their police activities. A good example is public reporting of use of force data, public reporting of traffic stop data, etc. Now, I actually define transparency more broadly, okay, as the interconnectedness and coordination amongst what I call the 4 aspects of the community. Now, these are, number 1, law enforcement. That includes like the sheriff's office, state and local police, etc. Next, we have community members. This includes community-based organizations, direct service providers, directly impacted individuals, and I would even say local businesses. Next, we have elected and appointed government officials. This also includes governmental agencies. And then last but not least, who's typically not included in discussions on policing reform, but who still has a substantial impact, especially on police accountability, is the local news media and press, okay? And we see this in the way that they depict victims of police violence compared to law enforcement. So according to my definition of transparency within the CAP method, okay, that these 4 aspects of the community would work together through interconnectedness and coordination as one community to support public safety and ensure police accountability through more so proactive rather than reactive strategies. And so that's what I've been doing. And This year, I've worked with state lawmakers across the country ever since last year's protest and have successfully passed several pieces of legislation into law in 5 states related to policing reform. One of them being Illinois, where I live, the other one being Wisconsin, the other one being Indiana, and then Missouri, and then Maryland. And so my plan is to continue to work with state lawmakers on providing them with the best model legislative language and evidence-based national, state, and local best practices as it relates to community empowerment centered policing reform. So that way we have long-standing change for a long-term problem. So thank you for having me. And like I said, I know Yigal spoke for a while, so I'm going to cut mine down shorter. So thank you.
You're muted, Dr. Noe.
Thank you. I was saying that actually I was thanking Mr. Carlton for all he has done and continue to do. If you were here when they began and listened very attentively to your girl and listening to Carlton, I want you to imagine for a moment that you have this type of people in healthcare, in school system, in economic being as to who succeeds and who doesn't succeed in a very capitalistic world. I have them in every facet of the economic pursuit. You're not gonna be hearing about, I can tell you this, you're not gonna be hearing about banks defrauding people they know nobody will talk for them. They can't speak for themselves. They don't have money to buy lawyers. What does that mean? They go through again, victimized. The pain and anguish those people go with in silence cannot even be phantomed. So I'm not gonna go there, but to say that I tip my hat for this gentleman and encourage them to continue the work they're doing. And I'm not gonna go into the questions I may have for them as individuals, but I wanna open this up for the audience to ask questions. So our audience, the floor is open for you. You can just raise your hand, Mr. Adam. You're gonna be able to help me here to ensure that we bring people to make their points and ask these gentlemen whatever question they may have for them. Okay, I'm not hearing getting any question. If you don't have any question, then I'll proceed. I have quite some.
A comment for Yigal, just an observation, I suppose.
Okay.
That's okay.
Sure.
Well, just for, I mean, everything you've done is just amazing, I think, and my own just lack of knowledge, and I've been learning myself, as Dr. Noe said, more recently about Israel and just as a nation. I was curious because I think for the United States, you know, when we think of nationality, we have a lot of options there. And I think when in Israel, you know, Jewish is kind of both a religion and a nationality within Israel. And I'm just curious, as Ethiopians are, you know, you mentioned as immigrants and the racism there, is that also something that they're able to, is there a level playing field there where they're able to be given the nationality of, you know, Jews as well as Israel's, like as they're given citizenship? And correct me.
Yes.
Okay.
Short answer is yes. Two points that need to be made just before you even like get into answering the detail is one is that nobody is perfect, and let's say the welfare or the greatness of a particular society can't be done in a vacuum against the ideal of perfection. It has to be done in context of the other societies that exist in the world. So Israel's not perfect, and I'd be the last person to say that it is. And at the same time, it affords its citizens, Arab, Ethiopian, Yemenite, Libyan, French, Iraqi, whatever, more opportunity to realize their potential than any society surrounding it. Certainly than any society that has a king and a hereditary dynasty in control forever or for the foreseeable future, where nobody can aspire to be prime minister because they don't have a prime minister and nobody gets elected king of the country around it. They either take power by inheriting it from their parents or in a military coup, as in Egypt or in Sudan right now, or in Jordan or in Syria, where the Assad dynasty has been ruling since 1970. Lebanon, which is complete chaos right now. Arabia, obviously, is run by a monarchy for more than 100 years now. So in the real world, out of all the options that the people there have, it's the best option. For example, my wife's family are Tigrawites from the Tigray region of Ethiopia. Right now, it happens to be that there is a war going on where rebels against the Ethiopian government who speak a different language than the Amhara majority are fighting for independence. And I don't know if they want to be a separate country or they want to join Eritrea, which is already a Tigray speaking country, which itself rebelled against and separated from Ethiopia not all that long ago in historical terms. And if they were there, they'd be in the middle of an active war zone. And it wouldn't be an issue of integrating into medical school. It would be an issue of hiding from the bombs and the bullets that are flying all around. So in that sense, I'm very fortunate that they got out. They're very fortunate that they got out and that they're in a place which is relatively safe. A number of years ago, I had gotten involved in bringing clothing and supplies to Sudanese immigrants in Israel who are not Jews, they're Muslims. But there was an area in Tel Aviv where thousands of Sudanese and also Ghana and Ivory Coast people who had left their countries because of different problems and come to Israel, and they were staying in what you could call tenements, like old abandoned hotels near the Tel Aviv bus station. And I had been involved in bringing them at one time I went to Israel with 17 suitcases full of clothes that we collected at a local synagogue here and through the Jewish Federation. And I had occasion to speak to many of these gentlemen and gentlewomen. And one of them, a Sudanese Muslim man, told me, God bless Israel because it's safe here. And whether you get an equal opportunity to get into medical school or not is a much higher level problem or a less significant problem than whether you have to worry about whether you're going to get shot on the way home. But as far as the Ethiopian community in Israel, to go back to your original question, there is, as I know, Ethiopian Israeli Knesset members who are in the parliament right now, who I remember them and I had met them and had dinner with them when they were in graduate school 20 years ago, long before anybody knew that they were going to become parliament members, or journalists before they became parliament members, or high school students before they became heads of nonprofits, or heads of working for nonprofits before they became